Hey, .NET friends. I'm excited to be here today and talk to you about something my team has been focused on for several months this calendar year. But before I do that, let me introduce myself. My name's Scott Addy, and I'm a product manager on the Azure SDK team. Now, you might hear the word Azure and wonder, what does that have to do with OpenAI? Allow me to explain. So, historically, my team has focused on shipping idiomatic client libraries for some of your favorite Azure services. Key Vault, Blob Storage, Azure Monitor, the list goes on. But earlier this calendar year, our team charter expanded, and we were tasked with applying our learnings from building those Azure service libraries to suddenly emerging areas of AI outside of Microsoft's walls. And that's when this partnership was formed with OpenAI. And we set out to provide this amazing developer experience for all of our .NET customers who are building intelligent applications. Now, in this session, I want to just provide a brief overview of what you can expect to hear about. I'll provide, for one, more background on this client library that was born through this partnership with OpenAI. But you'll also learn about some interesting features, see the code behind them, and I'll show a couple of demos using the latest API that we've added support for in our client library. We'll wrap things up with some resources for getting started and next steps, and then we'll leave time for questions at the end of the presentation. But let's pull back this curtain and talk about, for one, why this library exists, what it is, and who it is that's working on it behind the scenes. Turns out it's an army of people working on it. So, to set the stage here, at the Build conference in May of this year, that's when we announced the work that was being done in this space. And around that time, we looked at feedback from attendees at the conference and over 200 insiders that expressed interest in early builds of this library. There were three common patterns that emerged in this feedback. The very first one shouldn't surprise anyone who's watching, and that is, hey, it really felt like .NET was being neglected in the intelligent app space. As a .NET developer, I'm looking around, I see these multimodal AI experiences using speech, vision, and chat. Those really seemed like a pipe dream to me. And OpenAI, to make matters worse, only offered official client libraries for Python and Node.js. But you're telling yourself, hey, as a .NET developer, why should I have to go anywhere else? Why should I have to participate in those ecosystems, Python and Node? After all, the promise of .NET all along has been build anything anywhere. And more importantly, you shouldn't need a PhD in data science to be productive and to actually build an intelligent app with .NET. The second category of feedback we heard was around REST APIs. It's this idea that, okay, unfortunately, I'm not a Python developer. I'm not a Node developer. I truly do want to write C# code. That's where I'm most comfortable. And so that means I'm forced to craft REST API calls in C# to call those OpenAI REST APIs or OpenAI REST APIs. But as we all know, if we've done this before, that is both painful and error prone. There are several things you need to think about. A lot could go wrong. It requires a very experienced developer. And the final category of feedback we have here was this notion of no SLAs. And what I mean by that is, there were a handful of open source libraries that existed to use OpenAI, but none of those were backed by Microsoft. And so for some customers, we learned that's actually an adoption blocker. Maybe they're risk averse in the sense that they want to use these APIs in a mission critical application. And so for them, there's comfort in knowing that they can call up Microsoft and talk to someone to get support. That there's someone there to help them in the time of need. There's also the fact that they need to know someone is looking after the security aspect of things. If a vulnerability is discovered, who's going to be around to patch that? So with those three pain points in mind, we took those into consideration and equipped with a couple decades of .NET experience and years of insight gained from developing Azure Service Client libraries, the Azure SDK team partnered with OpenAI's developer experience team, and we created this official, I'm going to emphasize the word official, .NET library for OpenAI. So now .NET customers have an answer to those pain points that I showed on the last slide. And in June of this year, happy to report, shouldn't be news to most folks, that is when we officially GA'd our official library. Now, to get there to that GA date, there was a lot that had to happen, and that's what I want to talk about here. Now, originally, the OpenAI NuGet package was owned by a community member. Shout out to him if he's watching, Roger Pincombe. We worked very closely with Roger to transfer ownership of this NuGet package to OpenAI. Why did we do that? Because we looked at it and we said, well, the NuGet package, OpenAI, that truly is the best name to use in terms of SEO. And we want customers to be able to easily discover this package. It was also the most popular open source OpenAI library at the time in the .NET ecosystem. So it only made sense. We worked very closely with Roger, made the transfer of ownership to OpenAI happen. Roger drafted some migration guidance along with our engineering team so that customers could get from his older existing version of the library over to the new version that we had shipped, our 2.0 release. An official GitHub repo was created under OpenAI's ownership. We created a NuGet organization for OpenAI, and then we shipped this 2.0 release. And I want to call out that this was actually one of 16 releases that occurred in the 2.x release train since that ownership transition, which may seem like a lot. You know, this was June that we shipped. There have been 16 total releases to date. Why 16? Well, it was really because we needed to keep pace with OpenAI's developments. As they released new APIs or new models, we needed to ensure that our library fully supported those features and that our .NET customers could use those. Now, looking through the list of contributors out in this GitHub repo I described, you're going to notice something very striking, and that is that many of the contributors that you see in the screenshot there, in fact, are Microsoft employees. Many of them work on the Azure SDK team. It's that same crew you've trusted for years to build your Azure SDK libraries. I want to drive this point home that this is a library that Microsoft backs and it can be trusted. In fact, along with this effort, before this could even happen, we had to build a reimagined, unbranded version of our Azure core library that is at the foundation of each and every Azure SDK client library. This reimagined core library is what we call system.client model, and it provides shared primitives, abstractions, and helpers that really aid in building libraries for any non-Azure services. OpenAI is the example in this case. Again, .NET customers are in a place now where they truly have a library they can trust, and they can depend on Microsoft to back them up on this just as much as they can any other Microsoft-owned library or product. If a security vulnerability is discovered, rest assured we are working on getting a timely patch release out. And if OpenAI decides to ship a new API in a couple of days, or maybe tomorrow, you can count on a new release more often than not on the same day. We always make our best attempt to ship support on the same day or shortly thereafter. Now, this official library exists to support your multimodal AI experiences, but as a .NET developer, why should you care? Why should you move away from crafting those REST API calls? What's in it for you? What are the benefits? Well, let's dig into that. Most important thing here is that our library boasts complete REST API coverage. If you see an API listed on the platform.openai.com webpage rather, rest assured our library supports it. And to provide a more concrete example here, back on October 1st of this year was when OpenAI announced a public beta of their new real-time API. And this announcement occurred at their Dev Day conference in San Francisco. Our team shipped library support that very same day for this real-time API, beating both the Python and the Node.js libraries to it. We want to give customers fewer reasons to call REST APIs, and this same day release cadence is a fine example of that and our overall commitment to providing a wonderful developer experience. And in terms of models, we recognize there are many models to choose from with differing capabilities and price points. Uh, but similar to the APIs and what we were just talking about, you can think of this as if there is an OpenAI model available that you want to use, you can assume it is supported in our library from day one. Now, idiomaticity and productivity are other points that we're well versed in these as an SDK focused team. We truly believe the library should feel natural to .NET customers. And the architects behind the Azure SDK actually ensure that the library embraces both the strengths and the flaws of the .NET ecosystem. But as .NET developers, I think many of us would like to say that there are no flaws. It's perfect. That's why we're here. We embrace the ecosystem for what it is. We don't try to paper over anything. Again, we embrace it. And to enhance productivity, the library provides features that you would otherwise have to build yourself. Things like automatic retries with exponential backoff or distributed tracing and metrics with open telemetry. If these are things you do not want to think about, again, our library has you covered. We will take care of the heavy lifting for you. And finally, extensibility. Now, this was a big one for us because the library's design actually enabled us to make Azure-specific scenarios very straightforward, with extensions for Azure-specific concepts like responsible AI content filter results and on-your-data integration. The Azure OpenAI Companion Library is a testament to that extensibility and just how robust it truly is. And you can think of these extension points in the OpenAI library as an open invitation to community members to come in and contribute companion libraries, much like what we've done with Azure OpenAI. So I talked about this in the past in a couple slides ago, and that was this real-time API. That is the most recent feature to land in the library, and it's the one that there's more than likely the most buzz about right now that you've been seeing all over the place, social media and elsewhere. I'm going to show a video here, and this video demonstrates how you can use this API to build natural speech-to-speech experiences in your .NET applications. Very short video. Let's take a look.
Hey Siri, I mean Alexa, you. Hey you.
Hey there. No worries. You can just call me your go-to AI. What's up?
Can you recite the alphabet for me, please?
Sure thing. A, B,
Sorry, I
C,
meant
D.
backwards.
No problem. Here it is backwards. Z, Y, X, W,
The
V.
Greek one, the Greek alphabet, sorry.
Got it. Here's the Greek alphabet backwards. Omega, Psi, Chi, Phi, Upsilon, Tau, Sigma, Rho, Pi, Omicron, Xi, Nu.
All
Nu.
right, that's convincing. Your accent needs a little bit more work, though.
Fair point. Accents can be tricky, but I'm always ready to
So
improve.
yeah, tell me about it. All right, bye.
Okay, so I promised that would be a short video. Let's talk about what we saw there. Seems like a really, really simple interface, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes. So what did that demo actually use under the covers? Well, for one, to make that possible, it used OpenAI's Whisper model. And that's a model you would use to convert audio into text. It also used a custom tool that we wrote. We call this the I'm finished tool. And that tool enables the model, Whisper, to determine when it's appropriate to stop this interaction loop. You noticed at the end, Angelos had said bye. And again, that was the signal. This tool was taking care of this here. That was the signal that, hey, we're done here. We got everything we needed from you. Let's end this loop. And we're also in this demo, just a shout out to one of our MVPs, Mark Heath. We were using his open source N audio library, which allowed us to capture mic input as a stream and outputs, binary data audio segments to the speaker, whatever the default speaker is on the device. The sequence diagram you see on the slide here is showing all of the interactions happening behind the scenes. To be honest, it's a bit of an eye chart, and I just want to draw attention to two things here. The very first thing is authentication. This is the can that so many folks kick down the road. It's not the most exciting piece in an intelligent app, but it is critical that we understand this and get it right. And I bring up authentication because this was using OpenAI. OpenAI requires you to authenticate with an API key. That is your only option. If you are a customer who says, okay, that's kind of scary. We're not allowed to use keys in my environment. We don't have a way to securely store them. Maybe we're not using a key vault or anything like that. It's just something that could leak, and then we've got the security breach to deal with. If you are a customer who is thinking like that, that is part of the value proposition of Azure OpenAI. In Azure OpenAI, sure, you can still use that API key, but we also offer a much more secure keyless authentication option. And by keyless, I mean instead of using an API key to authenticate, you're using token-based authentication with Microsoft Entra ID, or what was formerly known as Azure Active Directory. That handles the authentication piece. And then role-based access control, or RBAC, comes into play to handle the authorization piece. And really what that means is you are assigning roles to users of your application that determine what level of access they have. What are they allowed to do? The other thing that I wanted to call out on this sequence diagram beyond authentication was that the real-time API you saw here is not RESTful. We talked about REST APIs earlier and how they could be a bear to deal with. There's yet another thing to think about here if you're using this real-time API, and that's that it's a stateful event-based API that communicates not over REST, but it relies on a WebSocket. So there's this duplex communication channel that is open between client and server. And if you have to deal with this directly in your application, that adds yet another layer of complexity that, quite honestly, some developers just do not want to deal with. That is, again, another reason why you would want to use this library. And before we get into resources and things you would look at for next steps here, I wanted to dive into some code. So I'm going to pop open Visual Studio. The code behind the demo you just saw is what I have up here. I wanted to draw attention to some things in here. You might look at code like this because we have samples all over Microsoft Learn, and you'll notice line 7. What's going on there? Hey, we have this pragma preprocessor directive. What is that doing? Well, if I uncomment this, or if I comment this out rather, you'll notice all of these red squiggly marks. And really what this is telling you is, hey, this is a beta grade API that you're using. And if you hover over, you'll actually see a message that leads you to that conclusion, that this is for evaluation purposes only. The reason why we design the library this way, why we annotate experimental APIs with an experimental attribute, is we want to be able to move quickly and keep pace with OpenAI. If we know there is a beta grade API that customers want to use, they're going to want to use that in a stable release of the library. They're not likely to take a dependency on a beta release. So we want to be able to, we wanted a mechanism where these, preview beta grade APIs could coexist with the stable bits in a stable release of the library. That's how we do that. All I'm doing here on line 7 is suppressing those compiler warnings. Another thing I wanted to draw attention to in this sample is that the entry point to any service, whether it's an Azure service or OpenAI in this case, is a client object. And we have this get configured client method that we're calling, and that appears near the bottom of this file. And I've set 3 breakpoints here to draw attention to the lines I want to talk about. This is the authentication piece from the sequence diagram. Line 189 on the bottom here is the path that was taken for that demo, where we are authenticating with an API key directly against OpenAI. Alternatively, we might say, well, maybe we want to use Azure OpenAI instead. And in that case, there are 2 different options here. You notice we shift from using this OpenAI client object to an Azure OpenAI client. And the constructor accepts not just an API key in this case, but an endpoint. And that endpoint points to the Azure resource that was provisioned. The keyless option that I described on that slide was it's up here where on line 164, we accept an endpoint to the Azure resource, but the second parameter in this constructor overload is actually the token-based credential that's being used. In this case, default Azure credential from the Azure Identity client library. One other thing I'll call out while I'm here in the dependencies is in the packages, we have this Azure AI OpenAI package, which takes a dependency on OpenAI, which takes a dependency on system client model, that new library that we had to build before we could ship this official release. And then, I also wanted to call out, just how minimal the changes are when you shift from OpenAI to Azure OpenAI. So in this case, if you want to authenticate with a API key, you're still going to use that with Azure OpenAI. It's just the class, the client class that really differs here, and you're passing along an endpoint as well. That's it for code changes. The other thing you'll notice when you shift from OpenAI to Azure OpenAI is with OpenAI, you are pointing to a model. That's what this string represents that we're passing on line 190. Whereas with Azure OpenAI, instead of specifying a model, you are specifying a deployment up in your Azure resource. And that's what this parameter is on line 180. All right. I wanted to, in the last few minutes we have, I wanted to shift over to a different demo, and I'm going to share my console here. I'm going to quickly run .NET Run, and this is again using that real-time API. Hey, Quincy. Now what this is doing is it's going to greet me and listen for what it is that I'm...
Hey, how's it going?
There we go. Hey, Quincy.
Sorry to hear that. If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know.
Quincy, I need to install something.
Sure, what do you need?
.NET 9 on Windows.
To install .NET 9 on Windows, visit the official .NET website. There you can download the installer for the latest version of .NET. Run the installer and follow the on-screen instructions to complete the installation. Once it's installed, you can verify the installation by opening a command prompt.
And I interrupted it there in the interest of time, but you get the point. Now, one cool thing you can do with this particular demo here, if I open the code in VS, let's say, hey, instead of an assistant named Quincy, I want an assistant named Scott, because I've heard that Scott knows a thing or two about .NET. But I also want to hear maybe Spanish instead of English. And for good measure, we'll change the voice to more of a radio style voice. These are all customizations you can make. So we will quickly make those changes. Scott, Spanish, and over here in the conversation session options, we are going to pass a voice that sounds kind of more like a radio voice. Now let's start this back up. .NET build. And then we will run after the build succeeds. And that very same experience will pop up, but you'll notice differences in the experience based on the changes that I've made here. Hey, Scott.
Hola, ¿cómo puedo ayudarte hoy?
¿Cómo se instala .NET 9 en Windows?
Para instalar .NET 9 en Windows, sigue estos pasos. 1. Descarga el instalador. Ve al sitio oficial de microsoft.net.microsoft.com/download.notm. 2.
And I interrupted it again in the interest of time, but you get the point that, the customizations here are endless. There truly is a lot of power to this API. This is just scratching the surface of what's possible. And so if we get into resources and where you would go next, if anything here piqued your interest, I'll leave you with some important resources to bookmark. The first column you see here is for OpenAI, and the second is for Azure OpenAI. If you're interested in creating your own deployments and some more robust security mechanisms, definitely check that out. The sample code for both demos we briefly looked at is linked here in that second row of resources. And I want to call out again, if you want to request a feature, if you have a question, or if you just need support, this is where we're using GitHub extensively. Our engineers are actively triaging incoming issues. This is something that some folks are looking at each and every day. I truly hope you learned something from this session, and I look forward to seeing the experiences you build with this new official library.